The gospel reading today gives us an interesting perspective because many times when we read the gospel, we think that the sheer presence of Christ looking upon his illuminated face will then cause us to fall on our knees and that we will worship him as the living God. And so in the other leper story, which comes, and that's why I had to get the book, comes in Matthew, it talks about now a leper comes before him and kneels and says, "Lord, if you will you make me clean?" And he stretches out his hand and he touches him and says, "I will," and then says, "Be clean." And then immediately he is healed. Now, in that, there's nothing now that says that he is converted to the Christian faith or to believe in him as Lord. He asked for a miracle to be performed, and that miracle was performed. Now we have 10 lepers. And here it's a little bit different, because here it said the lepers stood at a distance. Now, Levitical law, Leviticus, requires that lepers be separated from the community until they are checked by their priest to make sure that they're cleansed, and then they can return to normal society. So they are to stand at least 100 yards off. So this is why it says, who stood at a distance, and they lifted up their voices. Now, one of the side effects of leprosy is that it also doesn't give you the ability to talk. So it strains your voice. So this was quite the effort for them to do that. And this is interesting because this is only in Luke. We have in Greek here that they raise their voices legondes, saying, "Izu epistasa." So the term that they used to address him was epistasa. This is only used in Luke. The verb in there is istimi. Istimi means to be standing. And istimi then means the one who is standing over you. So it was the word in ancient times that we would use for authentico. It would be the same thing. So the translation here as master is somewhat correct, but it's just an interesting term that is only used by Luke. So they didn't address him as Lord, as we see in the other leper healing, right? So they just gave him the title of master or just a someone that they recognized, all right? And then in this one, he did not approach them. It says now, when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." At this point, there's no indication that any healing happened. So he did not touch them. So when Jesus performs miracles, he does them in many different ways. Sometimes he touches them when he heals them. Other times he uses a material, some kind of natural material, like clay or spittle. And then other times he performs it from afar, as he did in John in the nobleman, where the nobleman asked and he says, "No, your son lives." So in this case, he gave no indication now that he was going to touch them or contact them in any way. Now, this in no way means that he did not want to touch lepers, because that's why I read Matthew, because in Matthew, the leper clearly asked him, and he went, and the Gospels say that he touched him. And so as they went, and it says, "Istinapayin." So as they were going, now they became cleansed. And he says, "Go and show yourselves to the priest," because again, the Levitical law required that if they were cleansed, they had to go and see the priest. So now comes the three questions, all right? Because one of them, when he saw that he was healed, meaning that now he's on the road and he sees that he's healed, he turns back and he praises God, and now he says, "Phoni megali," to show that he's received his voice back. Luke makes the comment and says here that he was a Samaritan. The idea being now that what Jesus is establishing here his salvation is now open to all the nations, because the Samaritans were not considered part of now the salvation of Israel. The Messiah was coming for Israel, and now we have here, he's letting us know it's the Samaritan. And then Jesus asks his 3 questions. Were there not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? And was no one found to return and give praise to God except for this foreigner? And then he said to him, rise and go your way. And he ends it with, your faith has made you well. The Holy Fathers interpret this, that this was the leper's conversion. He is turning back to God, glorifying God, recognizing now who Jesus is, falling at his feet as you would for somebody that you worship, shows that the Samaritan now is converted. But we have the other 9. The other 9, it says nothing. We don't know whether they went back to their priest. We don't know what happened to them. But they contacted and they were exposed to God in the same way that the leper was. But their reaction and their end was not the same. There's no indication that they were converted. So the mere presence of Jesus in the Bible shows us now that not everybody accepted who he was. So what that tells us then is that conversion implies an energy from God and an energy from us. A willingness from God, which is always present, and a willingness from us. So we can come to church, we can do good deeds, we can pray, but if our heart is not turned towards Christ, if we don't believe who he is, then as the lepers that the 9 that left, then we can end up in the same place, that we have not been transformed. As our bishop says, come to church, but leave transformed. If you walk out that door and you are the same person as when you walked in, then you are one of the 9 lepers. Because you have heard the word, but the word has not in any way affected you, and you continue on with your life. So this is why the church always rails against the idea of separation of church and state. You cannot have a life that is religious on Sunday, that is faithful on Sunday, and then have that separated into your state-run life where you think and do whatever it is that you please. To tie this in with what I said last week, on Sunday we worship God, and then on the rest of the week we are God. So we have to understand, which one do we want to be? The leper that was cleansed and returned back to God, and his faith then made him well because he understood who Jesus was? Or are we one of the 9 who receives the gifts and the graces from God and then merrily goes along our way without having had any transformation in our lives?